Well, a very good morning to our viewers on GISL channels 4 and 16. We want to welcome you once again to our continuing coverage of the hearings of the Commission of Inquiry looking into the events of the attempted coup of 1990. Just by way of review, of course, this is the third session of the Commission of Inquiry, cabinet-appointed committee that is looking into the events surrounding the 1990 coup, trying, of course, to come up with some answers as to what could have led to it, and, of course, some of the things that, like the security arrangements that were in place at the time, both from a state level as well as around some of the centers that were at the very heart of the events of 1990, that is the Parliament Chamber and, of course, the Trinidad and Tobago Television Company. And this is the third session. As I said, we've had two sessions before, beginning on January 24th and ending on February 3rd. That was the first session, during which there were 11 witnesses called to testify before the five-member panel of commissioners. And then again, from, of course, March 4th, there was another session lasting for 5 days, actually. One of the days actually was devoted to in-camera hearings, but 4 days, of course, were dedicated to hearing evidence from people who were involved or were at the time in the Parliament Chamber, and some employees of the Trinidad Broadcasting Company at the time who were held hostage or had recollection of the events of 1990. And of course, as I said, we expect to join the live hearings again. It is starting again this morning before the five-member panel of commissioners. But before we do that and cross to the Caribbean Court of Justice building in Port of Spain, where the hearings are taking place, I want to welcome to the studio, and it's a great pleasure to have him here, Gerard Besson. And of course, Gerry, well known, of course, here in Trinidad and Tobago. And we want to talk a little bit, Gerry, probably in your role as an historian. I know you wear many caps at different times, depending on what the occasion is. But this morning, we want to talk a little bit about, the 1990 coup, your recollections of the events back then. I'm not sure if you wrote any articles or so, and I know you're a man given to the pen and all that, so that, we want to talk a little bit about that. Let's start with, where were you on the day of July 27th, 1990, when all of these events unfolded in Port of Spain?
Well, in fact, I was driving up Marval Road. And it must have been about 6 in the evening or something like that. And I was heading home, and I met a crowd of people who encouraged me to drive up Warner Street. And I drove up Warner Street, and then I began to realize that there was something really big happening at TTT, as it was at the time. And I thought it was a demonstration or something like that, really, because there were a lot of people, milling around and all of this. And then by the time I got home in Cascade and changed my clothes and come back downstairs and so put on usual TV to see what is on, I saw what everybody saw. And I didn't think that it was Player of the Month or anything like that, because I recognized some of the cast of characters who were there. I saw the people who were sitting there with Jones, Madeira, and so I knew, and I had a pang of fear or apprehension immediately, because I knew what had happened. I saw what it was, So I called Sheila, and so I said, "Look what's going on," and we were riveted. The interesting thing that took place for us that night was that I had an old Zenith transoceanic radio so that I could pick up the police band.
Okay.
And I picked up the police band, and I could hear them talking to each other as they reconnected with each other. And what was fascinating, there were several fascinating things that came out of that. What was interesting was to hear the tentative tone of voice as different stations spoke to something called central control as they came in one after the other that evening.
Yes.
And they identified what was going on. It was very, very tentative. It was people who were obviously feeling their way to find out if they, as a police service, if they were on board. This is the impression that I got. And the other interesting thing that took place as well was the young man who was the voice of central control that night. I think that he is one of the, because it was a very young voice, he was one of the unsung heroes of that whole occasion, because I listened to so many interesting incidents that range literally from the ridiculous to the sublime.
And this was the interactions with the police officers we talked.
Yeah. One of the more ridiculous ones was central control. Yes, come in. This is mobile, so. What happened? We just run off the road. Where are you? Piaku. Are you armed? No. Well, then roll up the window and stay right there.
Stay in the car right there.
Stay in the car right there. Somebody will come for you eventually. And then on the other hand, there was the irate voice of a senior policeman whose language I can't repeat here, who was saying we're going to the Red House and we etc., etc. And Central Control said, Sir, you will bring disrepute to the service if you did such a thing. And bear in mind that there are others who are listening to you here as Central Control.
Yes.
And you could hear, I mean, he was a young fella. I mean, this is a constable of a humble rank, you know, pulling up his superior, his senior officer in that way. And then there were more thrilling ones that came late in the night when a party of policemen were at the top of the runway in Piaku talking to Central Control and discussing an aircraft that was coming in for landing. And that was also a very sort of tense situation and there were many conversations, as I tell you, ranging from the ridiculous to the subtle, but Central Control, whoever that guy was, I would say hats off to him. Yeah. He was the voice of the police service, talking to the police service that night. So whoever he is out there, good boy.
No, during the course of the night, Jerry, did you pick up any sense that of eventually, as the hours wore on, as to what was happening both at TTT and at the Red House?
No.
Because I know there was at one time when I think the signal, I think it was on the Saturday morning, that the signal for the television station was knocked out at some point in time.
We saw that coming and going and so.
But did you pick up during the course of the night?
I don't remember, not from Central Control. I don't remember. It may have, but you know, it slips me now. But that was the type of conversation where, I mean, there were things where Central Control said to Besson Street Police Station, who said to them, and you're hearing shots in the background of the Besson Police Station communications to Central Control. You're hearing pow, pow, pow in the background, and he said, you all must lock up everywhere, and do not accept anything from people who come in to bring anything to the station, whether it's food or whatever. Don't accept anything, you know. So he was giving instructions to the various stations on how to deal with various situations that were arising that they were hearing.
Yes.
To look out for people coming to, pull the wool over your eyes and that sort of stuff.
Yes.
So that was my experience of the thing. And then, of course, well, as it unfolded by the following day and so. But we kept listening to Central Control as often as we could. It was interesting.
Yeah. I remember making my way into Port of Spain from the St. Augustine area, from the university campus.
Yeah.
And I had no inkling because I was in the gym on the afternoon. And traveling in a taxi, I had no car in those days, but traveling in a taxi coming down, saw the officers of the St. Joseph police station at its old location, not where it is now, at its old location on the roof. And then one of the passengers noted that, so I inquired as to what was happening, and then I knew. And as we drove closer to Port of Spain, you saw the smoke billowing from the police headquarters in Port of Spain. I know you're pretty close in Cascade, and it was pretty close to the action because I lived in St. Anne's at the time, and you felt that you were kind of
close.
Precariously close.
Too close.
To what was happening. What was your experiences like? I mean, in the ensuing days, I remember actually going across to High-Low at St. Anne's, and it was in a virtual mess following the
I didn't even
Friday
bother to
evening.
go. We checked to see what we had. We had food. We had food in the fridge. We had food otherwise, like rice and macaroni and all that kind of thing. I went to look to see if they had rum. You
needed some sobering liquid.
So I had a 3/4 bottle of Black Label there at the time. I said, well, right, let's hope this thing don't last too long. And well, we just sort of buckled down. But one of the things that took place that very evening was the sudden arrival of Emmett Hennessy, who is our brother-in-law.
Yes.
And suddenly Emmett arrived. He had run across the savannah because he had escaped from Radio Trinidad, where he had been shot at, and he gave us his very graphic description of escaping from Radio Trinidad, being shot at, being grazed by a bullet.
Was he bloodied at the time? Because I remember when he gave his testimony before the commission. Yes.
And he arrived. He arrived looking paler than usual, and kind of shaky and out of it. And he stayed with us for a while, and then he went next door to his other sister-in-law, to Peter O'Connor's house, and he spent the night there. So he was very, very shaken, He was I think he was in shock.
Yes.
Because he was literally shaken,
Yes.
And
had he gotten treatment at that time? Because I know with the gunshot wound, at some point he testified that he had...
I don't remember if he had gone to the hospital before he came to us, but I know that by the time he came to us, he was pretty shaky.
Yes.
He was pretty shaky.
From an historian's point of view, Jerry, it is said, and it's something that came out during testimony in the Commission of Inquiry from several witnesses, including some of the government ministers, who felt that there was an upsurge in crime and criminal activity following the events of 1990. The view is shared by some that, prior to that, well, we had the incidents of crime, yes, isolated incidents and so on, but it is the view shared by some that following the events, following that there was an increase. Do you share that view? I mean, as a citizen, as someone who has
I have heard that view, and I've thought about it. I agree that it spiked. But my feeling is that it was going to spike in any event. It was going to spike in any event because, you see, 1990 and the attempted coup did not happen in isolation. It didn't happen prang, as we say. It came out of something. And what it came out of is really a very old thing. It comes out of, one could say that, you see the events of 1970, you can't look at 1990 without looking at 1970. The events of 1970 was essentially an attempt by black people to redefine black consciousness, to take it beyond the notion of independence,
Yes.
and make it something of their own. In a very real sense, it was noble. It was. I mean, when you saw it in the street and you saw what took place in 1970, it was frightening. It was catastrophic. It was challenging in all sorts of ways. But in essence, what it was about was something that had to do with the human condition, and it had to do with the betterment of people.
Yes.
That is what
Yes.
it had to do
Yes.
with. It come out how it come out, right? But that it was a noble thing, and it came into existence in a certain sort of way. And then it crashed. Because the hopes and dreams, in many ways, didn't follow through. Sure, all of a sudden they had black people working in the bank, and all of a sudden, you know, there was a sense of social mobility and people going up in the world and achieving things, and so who would never have done that
had the
in a
opportunities
previous
before that,
generation,
yes.
because you know how things was.
Yes.
So that is what happened. But what also took place in the wake of 1970, and it may have had to do with how justice unfolded. How justice unfolded for the people in the regiment, for example. A lot of people felt that the people who ran the mutiny, for example, should never have gotten off scot-free. A lot of people felt that there were a lot of unanswered questions.
Yes.
There were a lot of things that were not really dealt with.
And that's in 1970.
That is 1970. The other thing that happened in 1970 as well, too, was that for the first time, Trinidadians, especially urban Trinidadians, East-West Corridor Trinidadians, began to identify their neighborhoods as ghetto.
Yes.
And the change from my neighborhood to the ghetto was really not an upward movement. It was a downward movement. And the way that people began to be characterized, and then the other thing that went into the so-called ghetto culture was the marijuana culture. And the drug trade and the drug thing began to take place in that period. And this was against a backdrop of what was happening with regard to an organization called the National Union of Freedom Fighters, NUF. Remember that?
Yes, of course.
Right.
And the guerrillas in the hills and
the
so on.
guerrillas in the hills.
Yes.
Now, all of this was what was going on. Now, while this was going on, a curious thing took place in the police service, because by 1973, the police stopped being the paramilitary organization that we knew, where police used to live in police station. And the terms of reference of their hours of work changed. Policemen used to be on duty, I think 100%. And suddenly they were working a 40-hour week. But the amount of people in the force didn't increase.
Yes, yes. The workload did though.
But the workload did.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
So suddenly there was a situation unfolding that was handled by the political directorate at the time that allowed this transition, which I suppose was something that was coming in any event, to take place, where the police was severely at a disadvantage in terms of hours work and the amount of people who could be in a station at any one point in time. And this is against the backdrop of the increasing drug trade and increasing random violence, nothing like what we know today. But you see, these were the elements. The other thing that was taking place through the 70s and into the 80s was the sound of what tongue say, the sound of calypso, because we are of a certain age, so we remember the calypsos of Delano, the apocalyptic calypsos of Chalky, of Delano, of even Sparrow himself. And what was the prophecy all the time? The prophecy was fire. The prophecy was destruction. The prophecy was apocalypse. This is what a rising, repeating chorus. As a historian, when you read the historical information about the social history of Trinidad, and you read people like Professor Rolle's books and so, and he's analyzing calypso, you begin to realize that what was taking place in the community was a condemnation of the society, capitalism gone mad, a collapse of moral values, a sort of twist and distortion of other values, and a fearful apprehension of the collapse of family life.
Yes, yes.
Because we had one of the things that killed the best ideals of black power was the oil boom of the 70s. Suddenly there was money.
Yes.
And you know, money is a very corrupting thing. So the money went through the system. Fellas who were idealistic became tuned to the money. So all these things, there were a lot of things. And then the significant thing was when the PNM lost the election. Well, the death of Williams. The death of Williams affected Trinidad on the whole, and it affected a certain generation of black people in a certain kind of a way. The death of Williams was very, very poignant. Everybody wanted him to go, wanted him to go, wanted him to go. But the day he died, a lot of people cried. And then Chambers came on the scene. It was a sort of interregnum. He didn't have it in him, or the politics did not allow him to put into place the monetary reforms necessary. So the economy went into free fall. By the time 86 came along, and this grouping of opportunists and idealists and inappropriate partners arranged themselves into a government, they had no recourse. The IMF was around the corner because things had gone from bad to worse. Now, from the time things went from bad to worse, what people began to see on the street was vagrancy in a horrific sense that we never saw before.
Yes, yes.
You know,
you also saw a number of mass demonstrations taking place against the government and the austerity measures. And it is said, I think even Mr. Robinson, the former Prime Minister, who gave evidence before the Commission, was saying that these are, or were the harsh realities of the time. These are the factors that led to what happened in...
But nobody wanted to hear that.
Yes.
What you see, very similar to now, when you move out a government and you put in another one, you want instant gratification, you know.
Yes.
You want your business fixed
no,
one time, now for now.
Yeah.
Of course, it couldn't happen. But in the meantime, what was taking place was that you see the social decay, especially in the poor neighborhoods, was so profound, was so deep, that it was going towards a bursting point. Now, the other thing too, that from a social historian's point of view, is this: you must always remember that the Afro-Creole culture to which we all belong is an old thing. It's older than we think. It is a couple hundred years old, you know. You have to see it against the backdrop of what was taking place in the Caribbean in the 18th century, in Grenada with Fedon Revolution and Haiti. They had revolutions and real bloody things that took place. Those same people came here, you know. And the people who came here there's a chronology of revolt. 1849, British troops opened fire on people who lived in Port of Spain outside the Red House. There was a riot. And there was a cause for it, there was a reason for it, very elaborate. It had to do with the courthouse and how people treated felons and non-felons and all that sort of stuff. Within a generation, within another 40 odd years or so, the Red House was burnt down at the turn of the 19th century. And then in another 30, 40 years, there was the Butler riots. And then in another 30, 40 years, there was 1970. So you see, it is a chain of events where people rise up for various reasons. So what took place in 1990, by the time 1990 came along, the Afro-Creole culture had thrown up a charismatic leader in much the same way that the Afro-Creole culture threw up a charismatic leader with Geddes Granger in 1970, yes, in a different format.
Yes.
And in the same way that the Afro-Creole culture threw up a charismatic leader in 1956 with Dr. Williams. The Afro-Creole culture, the Creole culture of Trinidad, I'm not talking about Indian people and Chinese people and all different kind of people, I'm talking about people like
culture,
us,
yes,
right? The Afro-Creole
yes,
culture, or more specifically, you could say the Afro-French Creole culture, because that is what it really is, throws up charismatic leaders that could either be positive or negative, but the culture throws it up. These people, they have a lot of people who head hot, but nobody will take them on. It is the culture, it is the people who follows and creates the charismatic personality.
Yes. Yeah.
It is the people who put the spotlight on the remarkable person. So 1990, when 1990 came on the scene, that was a pot that was cooking for a long, long time. And there was a sense of inevitability about it. It came out the way that it did because Trinidad is a place that in a curious kind of way reflects, and this is puzzles the social scientists in many ways, it reflects what is going on in the world. You know, when Williams came on the scene, Williams reflected what was taking place in the post-colonial period. And Williams was in company with people like Nyerere, Nkrumah, Nehru. These were the third world leaders who were all speaking the same language. And we were there. When Granger came on the scene, again the same thing. Because what Black Power was saying, what Cambon was saying, what all of them were saying, Granger,
Yes.
all of them, was fundamentally no different to what was being said in South Africa by Mandela.
And also at the time they seemed and another school of thought seemed to suggest that there was some antecedents to 1970 in that you had the events at Sir George William, for example, you had that whole revolution in music, for example. You had a lot of things in terms of social consciousness, and it was not just isolated to TNT, but it was happening at other centers throughout the world. And you talk about the leaders, you know, those African leaders in the area and so on. Those people who was preaching that kind of consciousness. You had Stokely Carmichael, for example, who later became Kwame Ture.
Exactly.
So there was a consciousness.
And then there was the dark side of that as well too,
yes.
who was Abdul Malik.
Oh yes, yes.
Who was a pretend person. But that was in the same milieu as well. Yeah. So when 1990 came along, and what happened was it was a black Muslim group in Trinidad, but when you looked at the Muslim world, it was very similar. as a matter of fact, I think the events in Trinidad in 1990, if my memory serves me correct, coincided with what was happening in Iraq.
Yes, it was
Almost
actually
day to
the
day.
start of the Gulf War.
Of the Gulf
War
War.
had taken place a few months earlier,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
The Gulf
So
War
you
had
see,
ended.
what the point I'm making is that Trinidad has this curious capacity to mutate in the same pace with what is taking place in other parts of the world.
Yes.
You follow?
Yeah.
So the spike, because this is the beginning of this part of the discussion, the spike in the crime in the wake of 1990 came about because of a lot of other things that had taken place within the country over a period of time that allowed the spike in the crime, not the least of which was the change in the work of the police service in that period.
Yeah. Were you surprised, Jerry, at the ease with which some of the Muslim insurrectionists who went into the parliament chamber, the ease with which they got into the chamber?
No, nobody is.
Because
This is how we are.
Yes, as a people,
Yeah.
it was testimony coming out of the commission. I think it was former Minister Jennifer Johnson who said that both herself and Mr. Dukan were very surprised.
How easy?
That for a few days before, a visitor just walked straight into the tea room and was able to access the parliamentarians.
Yeah.
And so David Simmons, actually, who is the chairman of the commission, he said that this happened in Trinidad Friday afternoon. On Tuesday, the sitting of the Senate, I think it was in Barbados, there was increased security around the Parliament chamber. Now, following the events of 1990, I don't think that our security was adequate before.
Oh, no.
Or even after.
No. Well, it has a lot to do with our culture. In the colonial period, the apparatus of security, the police itself, the police force as it was itself, was a paramilitary organization that was run and drilled like, as it was, a light infantry division. It was officered and it was drilled and it was operated in that manner. It continued in that style, basically, up until Eustace Bernard. Up until Bernard. One could say it continued in that style up until May. But I think that after 1973, when the terms of work changed, and the 40-hour week began for the police service, and the arrival of Mr. Burrows on the scene, the nature of a notion of duty as opposed to work began to alter.
Yes. Because he was very instrumental in I think he was sergeant at the time.
No, he was an inspector. Yeah.
But the time when he went up into the hills and sort of took on almost single-handedly.
Well, with the flying squad and
yes.
Yeah, with Mr. Richardson and others and so.
Yeah.
That was, well, that in itself was a questionable exercise, but at the end of the day, what one could say was that it was a necessity.
Yeah.
It has been argued that what Williams saw at the time was the hand of CLR James pulling the strings of young men who were perhaps innocent and just idealistic and so. And the real danger of causing insurrection and so was really a possibility. And we were trying to put ourselves into the format to take advantage of the oil boom. So we didn't want any commerce here.
Yes.
You know, and I think it also came out of fear, the action of Burrows. But what Burrows did was that he broke the chain of command, in my opinion, because I believe it should have gone from Eustace Bernard to Tony May to Clive Seeley. as commissioners of police. But with the advent of boroughs, the chain of command changed,
Yes.
and so therefore the
There was a
succession went in a different direction. But you see, I'm not so informed. I just read Bernard's book, and so I see what he wrote. But the thing is that 1990 came out of a background where you see the Calypsonians in Trinidad, the Calypso culture in Trinidad is a very, very powerful thing. I don't subscribe necessarily to Calypso truth. I don't think that Calypsonians are inspired and what they say is true. But I do believe that Calypsonians have their ear to the ground. They come out from the guts of black people. So often what they say is said with a kind of perception of how things are going to unfold. Now, mind you, there's a degree of self-fulfilling prophecy as well. But the fact of the matter is that when you read the lyrics of what people like Stalin wrote, when you read the lyrics of Valentino, and I recommend them to you, buy Rolle's book.
Yes.
When you begin to read,
and Valentino himself was also a revolutionary of sorts.
In the 70s.
And this is how he got the sobriquet, not sobriquet, but was labeled as the People's Calypsonian.
As the People's Calypsonian.
Yeah.
And then others like Delano, with his 3 dread calypsos, the apocalyptic calypsos. I mean, these fellas were in a very real way feeling the pulse of the people, and that is what they were foretelling.
Yes.
In a way, and that is what took place.
Yeah.
But something I would like to tell you. A lot of people have asked me, they say, how come Muslim? How come black Muslims? What people don't really understand is that there have been a tradition of black Islam in Trinidad in very, very olden days. Now, it is not an unbroken tradition, but there was a point in time in the 1800s when a remarkable man arrived in Trinidad. His name was Jonas Bath. That was his name that was given to him by whoever the Englishman was at the time when he come off the boat. He was a slave. But he was a Mandingo, and he was a Muslim. And it took the English a little while to understand, but wait a minute. All these other people, whenever they meet this man, they treat him with elaborate respect. It turned out that this man was a very highly educated imam, highly educated in the Quran.
Yes.
And he was a man who gained the respect of people. And what he did was a very, very interesting thing. He found wherever he could Muslims out of West Africa, here in Trinidad. He raised money, he bought their freedom, he formed a society for the purpose of repatriation, of getting people to go back to their homes. And he did succeed with a handful. Now, the Islamic Mandingo movement survived, I think, for perhaps 2 generations or 3 generations, which would have taken them perhaps into the 1860s, 1870s, and then they fizzled out. But there was a memory, a collective memory of their existence that was there. And perhaps there might have been individuals who had continued the faith. I don't know.
Yes.
It's one of those oddities.
Yes.
So the arrival of Islam as a black presence in Trinidad in the 1980s, and so is not something that was so alien as all of that. It had historical precedent.
And antecedents.
For what that is worth.
I want to come back and talk a little bit about that because, some of the ideas of Islam and so on would say, or the Muslims in Trinidad, because we are peaceful person, people and so on, we are given to love and so on. And then you have the other part that says, well, jihad is really, if once you have to engage in jihad for purposes as a means to an end, then that of course is really something that you just have to do as a Muslim. I want to talk about that a little bit, but there's something that is resting on my mind in terms of, as we spoke about some of the factors that might have led to what happened in 1990s, and it is some of the answers that the Commission of Inquiry is seeking. But one of the things mentioned by Abu Bakr is one of the things that, the literal straw that broke the camel's back was, I think, a week or two before, the then Prime Minister, Gerard Robinson, had said that it was his intention to create a monument to Jean Miles. Now, I'm not sure how many young people know a lot. I certainly just know about Jean Miles on the surface in terms of her role in corruption busting and all that. Not as a government official, of course, but one who was close enough, to the political or members of the political directorate. In your opinion, as an historian, how significant is that in terms of the Prime Minister at the time saying, well, I'm going to erect this monument. I think it was supposed to cost $500,000, and in a time of austerity measures and so on, that is a lot.
$500,000 was
it might come like $5 million or more, So, but what do you think?
My opinion on that? Jean Miles, who was a person I knew, Jean Miles was an interesting person in the sense that she did blow the whistle on a corruption scandal. She was a flamboyant personality, and she was obviously a person with a lot of social conscience. And she did blow the whistle on a corruption incident. And
that was the gas station racket.
That was the gas station racket. And also her father was also a person who was a very outspoken, upstanding type of public servant, and and who spoke out in certain ways and so. But to single Jean Miles as someone deserving of a public monument, because when you think of public monuments in Trinidad, Cipriani is a public monument. I mean, the guy was some 8 times.
Cuba Uriah Buzz Butler.
Exactly. So Jean Miles does not fall into the category of deserving to have a public monument. You understand? So I think that Mr. Robinson, in trumpeting Jean Miles in that period as a hero deserving a public monument, was either talking through his hat or using that as some sort of catspaw, or using that as a political device to garner support. Because the thing about Jean Miles was that she was a white Trinidadian.
Yes.
So he might have been using that as some sort of device. But in real terms, I think that Jean Miles was by no stretch of the imagination deserving of a public monument. I think that she could have been given a posthumous award, which I think might be appropriate and probably still is appropriate. But the idea of a public monument, bearing in mind that, we have one post-independent real public monument, which is Cipriani. And then we have the Calypso kings of Sparrow and Kitchener, at the two extremes of Port of Spain, as public monuments.
Well, I think there's
and then we have Mahatma Gandhi Square. Right? So I think that these icons are deserving of public monuments. but not Jean Myers. So that was a confusion-making thing. Now, for Abu Bakr and they to seize upon that and to use it as an excuse, I think that was equally shallow. Because that is, I mean, the issues of the period were really serious issues. The stringent impact of the IMF, the difficulties that were taking place in the country on the whole, the civil servants who had been reduced in their take home.
Yes, and the COLA, have their COLA removed.
So the $500,000 for him to for Robinson to bring that up at the time, I think that was very misguided.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that you know they seem to be heading, or the direction the government seemed to be heading, was the fact that you know they so wanted to expose the corruption of the previous regime, which happened to be the PNM that you know went for some 30 years and so on prior to 1986, and that was one of the intention was to really expose that. But then you were also doing that because at the time when the insurrection happened and the storming of the parliament, there was a very crucial debate taking place in the House of Representatives, and that had to do with the whole Tesoros scandal. So all of it, I think, was sort of a, and yes, again, you have to question the motives. What
distraction?
Yes,
you know, it could have been a distraction. I really,
because I don't think it was helping the cause in any way at the time.
It had no cause. It had nobody's cause. Nobody's cause.
Yeah.
Nobody's cause. The situation in the country at the time was one where the community, the black community, threw up a charismatic leader.
Yes.
I would say of the not constructive side. But you must always bear in mind that the culture, this culture that we have, that we take so much for granted, this Creole culture, this Trinity the Bone culture. You see, it has had different names over the years, but it really always means the same thing, right? This sweet, sweet Trinidad, I love this country bad, and then bury me in the middle of the city, right? That feeling, that thing, that is a very, very powerful, very alive collective consciousness that has the capacity, even as we speak, to produce a remarkable individual that would be identified by an increasingly large group of people who will increasingly feel that person is speaking for us. And that person could come out of the intelligentsia, as Williams did. It could come out of the black youth, as Granger did. It could come out of the ghetto, as Abu did. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Because when you look at it, Abu Bakr came out of the period when the PNM, which is since independence has been the significant black consciousness forming organization. When they were out of power, they produced Bakr from the same culture. In the period when Williams supposedly took his eye off the ball in the 60s and things began to drift, they produced Geddes. So what does it tell you? It tells you that the central government has to be on its toes, it has to be very, very aware, and it has to lead by leading. Because if it does not do that, the culture produces the charismatic leader. And it could be good, bad, or indifferent.
Jerry, I'm sorry to cut you at this point, but you know, I want to really thank you very much.
Yeah.
It has really been a very interesting discussion. You know, there's so much that we can talk about, so many issues that we can raise, but I suppose you know, at some point in time, as we progress with this exercise in the national interest, that we will have you back if you will grace us with your presence again. You know, but thank you very much. I want to thank you for guesting with us here. Of course, I understand that we're ready to cross to the Caribbean Court of Justice building, Courtroom 2, where the Commission of Inquiry looking into the events of 1990 is about to begin. This is the third session, we remind you, and of course it's before a 5-member panel of committee.